Welcome to Bright and Ambitious, the podcast that helps you write, revise, and publish your next work. I'm your host.
We'll take it. We've been working on this intro for like 7 minutes now. We'll take it.
I'm your host, Kailey Bright.
And I am the producer of the show, Joel Seymour. And it's spooky season for like a few more days.
I would say it's still spooky going into winter, but I mean, people are more festive.
Yeah. We have the movies we've been watching.
Yeah, we're watching Twilight tomorrow.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
In theaters.
Yeah, by the time that you're listening to this right now, we will probably be at the AMC. Popcorn in hand.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to wear an outfit based off of a drawing that one of my favorite artists made on Instagram.
Yeah.
So that's my goal.
And I'm gonna be wearing an outfit that looks exactly like the outfit I normally wear, except for I'll be going, oh whoa. Twilight is not the most scary movie, but
no, I do wish we were interviewing Stephenie Meyer. That would be crazy.
That would be crazy. But we are interviewing a absolutely fantastic author who specializes in a genre that we haven't really gotten to cover.
No, it's horror.
Horror. Ooh, we harmonized. Who did you interview?
I interviewed Gaeli Love Weiss.
Yes, and she is an absolute delight.
She is. She's full of energy, which I'm so excited for this episode in particular because like there's a whole lot of really good information in regards to writing horror and writing advice in general.
Yeah. Kailey, can you tell me a little bit about what Stagnant Water is?
Stagnant Water is a gothic horror novel that is set in the Ozarks. And we follow Naomi, who is a young woman who is essentially trying to leave her hometown, but is finding both reasons to stay and creatures to fear.
Ooh. All right. I'm sold. In your conversation with Gaeli, you talk a lot about the role that the Ozarks played, both in the research and the actual like storytelling, but also in how that shaped the themes that she's exploring in the book itself. And so we're going to be talking about the location and how that can impact your story. You're going to be talking about how horror is a useful genre to say more than just getting you startled at night. And we're going to be talking about how to write effective horror. And I gotta say, I know I say this every episode, but like I really mean it. This is one of the most helpful, insightful episodes that I think we've done so far. So I think you're in for a treat, not a trick.
Cute.
Is that stupid?
That's not stupid. That's cute. The whole time I was just thinking, I think every single time we do a new episode, you're like, this is the best one we've done so far.
This is the one.
Like we just keep compounding on ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. I honestly love your outfit. One of my questions was, would you consider this book Southern Gothic? And it might be more Midwestern.
That is something that I didn't realize that people didn't like classify Missouri as the South for a long time. Because in my brain, I would say like the southern part feels more similar to the South than it does to the Midwest. And a lot of that has to do with like the historical aspect. And I think it's kind of odd sometimes when people separate that and then put it in like, they're like, oh no, it's more like Northern. It's like, I would maybe disagree. But in terms of like Southern Gothic as a genre, I mean, does Southern Gothic have to be in the South, or is that kind of where it originated, and then that genre can kind of parse out and pick different places in the world? Within mine, there are things that I think a lot of people would associate with the South, but then there are things that I associate with the Midwest. And there are things that have to be associated with the Ozarks in particular. And maybe even like the towns that were a big inspiration for me in particular. And it all just kind of a bunch of different Venn diagrams overlapping until you find your exact little spot, you know?
Honestly, I really like how you talked about Southern Gothic because I don't read a lot of Southern Gothic or horror novels typically. So that's why I wanted to ask because, like, I am ignorant of the genre and I could definitely see a lot of, like, similarities living in South Carolina.
And then for like the Appalachian part, that was something that in my research I got to learn a lot about how like a lot of people who live in the Ozarks
Yeah.
now, they they're from people who were in Appalachia. And from what I read, it was a lot of people who were like, this area, you know, these mountains are getting a little too saturated with people. We want to have more privacy, which I think really makes sense with a lot of the areas that I've adventured through in the Ozarks. It's a very private place, you know, everybody kind of wants their own space. It's very much kind of mind your own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there are a lot of similarities
Gotcha.
within like, you know, folk practice and a lot of like folklore kind of drifted with them as well.
Yeah, I really like how you write the setting. Relating to like the Midwest and the South, I think something that was really unique about your story is the use of the dialect in your dialogue. Maybe again, maybe I'm ignorant to it because I haven't read a lot that is centered in or at least grounded in the real world. But I'm very curious, like what well, first question is how did you consistently write these characters with this dialogue and dialect?
So the first step to that was not writing a dialect at all. I wrote in like proper English during my first draft. I didn't mess with it. I think it was a little, it took a while for me to figure out exactly how I wanted to do that because I knew that I wanted it. I didn't, you know, she'd have an accent. I didn't want to pretend that she wouldn't. I wanted her to try and be as realistic as possible without her sounding like cartoonish. And I tried a whole lot of different things. Honestly, don't even know what they all were. It was a lot of page by page, seeing how things went in like a second draft. In all honesty, I realized what I was going to do once I read Winter's Bone. The author is from the Ozarks. The book
Ooh.
takes place in the Ozarks, and I read that and I was like, that does not feel like it's making fun. It just feels like it's very descriptive of how they would talk. And then I used some of the vocabulary of that book or of other books that I read as inspiration or research. Um, but it was also mixed with like my dad is a big inspiration in terms of like the talking that happens.
Oh.
Because like my dad, my grandpa, they grew up going down there. Like it's, you know, in my dad's side of in the Weiss side of the family, they've been going down there since like the 30s. And we have like pictures and we've collected like newspaper clippings and
Gotcha.
stuff like that. And so like some of like the phrases and things like that are just things that like my dad or my grandpa would say. And I kind of threw it in there because that's my not my version of the Ozarks, it's my experience with the Ozarks, you know? There's only so much of it that's
Mm-hmm.
happened like without them. And so for me, they're just tied to it.
I love that. That's really, really cool. Like I love like the personal aspect. Like you can tell the story is very personal, or at the very least, like you know your story very well. Um, because I was blown away just by like how well you knew your characters. And I do see the respect there when it comes to the dialect. Like I never at one point did I think that like Naomi was like dull or stupid. And the same thing goes with all the other characters. I mean obviously there's some characters I did not like, but I was not supposed to like them.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
I
okay.
that so much. That's just that warms my heart, you know. That's exactly the kind of thing that you dream of hearing about your writing. So thank you.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna be giving you lots of compliments, so get ready for that. Um, so yeah, like I think that's so fascinating that you tried to do it straight your first draft, like clean, in terms of no unique phrases or infractions, that sort of thing. Because I cannot imagine this book without them. I feel like there would be something lost. Okay, so honestly, I'm really excited to talk about this. So tell me more, and let me make sure I say their names right. Tell me more about the Haints.
Yes, Haint. So that's an interesting one because, and I guess this will touch on something that I think we're probably going to talk on later, but I've always been obsessed with scary things. And I've always, I mean, like some of the first things that I can remember reading were like the scary stories to tell in the dark and all of that. And I had like an obsession as a child with the Headless Horseman. And like I can remember being, it must have been kindergarten based on the house that I lived in, having these memories where I checked out everything from like the school library on the Headless Horseman and like didn't give it back to the library for like a long time because I was like, oh my gosh, like nobody's talking about this. And oh, this is such a real issue that we have. And like, I'm going to solve it because nobody's checking out these books from this elementary school library. So no one must be interested. And I did not know what I had not heard of a haint until I went to go do research. And actually, that's another thing that was not the creature itself was in the story from the very, very beginning, but it did not have a name until much later drafts. And the term came to me through research, and it is a creature that like is talked about a lot in like the South, and in the Ozarks and in like Appalachia, and then I believe it actually has its actual origin from the Caribbean and like African folklore, and it traveled, and that's why it was so big in like in the South. And I learned about it and I hadn't named the creature yet, and I didn't really know if I wanted to name it or if it was just this thing, It didn't necessarily need a name.
Yeah.
But when I came across something that fit for the area, for the geography, it made sense to include it because the story is about her gaining this knowledge that was kind of kept from her by her family, and her kind of coming back into contact with it and relating to it again. And by learning about a lot of like the folklore and everything of this area, she's able to like connect with her family and connect with her history, in both ways that can be, like, wow, I'm learning about my family. I know about my grandma and like the things that she lived through. But it also has to do with like a lot of the negative history of a place and having to come to terms with it in order to have a better forward existence in an area. You can't like ignore the history of a state, of a town, and just be like, oh, I'm going to put my blinders on and move forward and everything's going to be fine. Like that's historically, if you're going to ignore the past, it's not going to play out well for you. And so
yeah.
that was definitely something that was another one of those things that came to me in the learning process. I learned a lot about my favorite place in the world while researching for the book.
I love that. Oh my goodness. Yeah, because like I didn't know what a haint was. I'm surprised I didn't, considering it's like deep rooted South folklore. But to be fair, I think I was more into ghosts and ghouls as a kid. But yeah, I was very interested when I found out like this was what the creature was, because I was like, okay, like why did you choose this over say like I want to say vampire, but that wouldn't work well with your story at all.
So it really does have to do with the fact that the story itself takes place in the Ozarks. Because I think that
Yeah.
if it had taken place in Chicago in the suburbs and the family was Catholic, then it probably would have been a demon. One of my favorite things to do while writing is picking a place and making the place a character is one of my favorite parts of doing it. I have no story ideas that I want to work on in the future that don't do that, where at the very least, the state or the region is a major part of the story. I think it's fascinating. And I think where you live isn't necessarily defining of who you are, but it does help in the construction, you know? And so for her,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so for her, because she was in the Ozarks, because, she had grown up, in an area that is steeped in this folklore, that's what she called it. But I don't think that's necessarily, it's not, it doesn't have to be like what it is, Like if that thing happened somewhere else, then someone else would call it whatever it is in that area.
It's more about what that creature represents rather than what the creature is.
Oh boy, that's a good one. Okay, so like I said, kind of new to writing. Like I have a film background, and so like I did like
Yeah.
screenplays in college for a while. And genuinely before that, uh, I wrote a short in the 6th grade that Mrs. Price sent in for a $10, like award. Like that's this whole
Let's
writing
go.
thing was it's COVID and I don't know who I am. Let's try this out thing. And it turns out that I like really liked it. But
Yeah.
but I think for this one, it was very much what it represented. But I think I'm new enough to writing that I really don't want to stick myself into a pattern. And so for other things that I'm
Got
like
you.
working on, I usually issue myself like challenges, um, where I'm like, this one has
Okay.
to be longer than the last one, or like this one, I have one that's like dual perspective, and it's like, we're gonna try this out. Like it's ultimately what is art if not like a challenge to the self? I'm working through things,
Yeah.
and I'm also working on a craft, and so I want to challenge myself and see what I'm capable of. And you mentioned, what does the creature represent versus like what it is. And one of my best friends, who is also a writer, but she does screenplays. She often, like when we work together or we talk about stories, she talks about how sometimes she gets very irritated that people get caught up on like a metaphor in their story, and then they let the metaphor guide every single
Oh.
decision, rather than like letting the metaphor kind of, here's your idea, this is what you're working with, now who are these characters, what would they do, where would they go? And so that's also kind of something that I'm looking at with future projects, to not be quite, what is this metaphor? How does it carry you through? Which genuinely was a thing that I did with this one, particularly with, inherited trauma and generational curses. I mean, that's pretty blatant within the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of curious. Yeah. So within your experimentations, um what kind of genres and characters have you been exploring since setting is very important to you?
So horror is my best friend.
That's
Never
so
let
okay.
her go. But there's so many different types of horror. And one of my favorite things about horror is when it's like tied to other things. So my favorite example
Mhm.
is Hereditary, which is my favorite horror movie. I love it.
Ooh.
I hate it too. It upsets me so badly. Like I wept in the theater the first time I saw it. Like I was not okay after I watched that movie. Um, big inspiration too for
Oh wow.
Stagnant. Um, but in that, you could like erase the actual like supernatural parts of the story, and it would still be a horror film. Or it would at the very least be a story where the people within it are experiencing horror. Not necessarily like, I mean, there still would be some jump scares, um but the horror of like loss, when you lose someone, you're not just feeling sad. Like that's like the most
Mhm.
boring way of looking at it. Like you're feeling like this gut wrenching, someone's literally gone from this earth. That is a crazy thing to think about. They are no longer here on this plane of existence. Also,
Yeah.
what do you mean plane of existence? That's horrifying enough as it is. Um, and then horror is added onto it, almost like as an excuse to actually show how scary, and I can't think of another synonym, but like horrifying a very normal human experience is. And so that's another big one that I like touching on.
Yeah.
It's an anxious mind, you know. The reason I got into horror is probably to like run through scary scenarios in a way where I can like, so if you do this in this kind of scary movie, maybe it'll turn out like this and you'll survive. And I think ultimately it's the same coping skill, that I'm traveling and I'm thinking of scary things and then I'm trying to solve them in my brain to make myself feel safe.
That makes perfect sense. I have a couple of thoughts. Like with the Hereditary inspiration, I can totally see that, because I mean, even one of my questions was like, what's scarier, creatures of folklore or your family?
Yeah.
Because like I can see that in Stagnant Water. Like truly, like there is more horror, or at least like more situational horror that people typically don't want to go through when it comes to family death, or the estranged family, like the people that like have hurt you but you're supposed to love, or they're supposed to love you. You do that really, really well in this story, and so I wanted to let you know that, A, and B, like I can see where these influences came from. I wanted to ask you if you were writing in any other genre, just because, like, again, I see you as a horror novelist, and I didn't, in case there was something else, I was like, let me talk about that. But I'm
I
glad
have
that you're like, no, this is me through and through.
I mean, I have one that I have an uber vague idea. Basically, like on my birthday one year, Danny and I were watching Lord of the Rings, and I was like, nah, I should write a fantasy, like a high fantasy, like, but it's not adult, like the Lord of the Rings, that like of
epic.
all ages kind of feel, I want it, like, if I'm gonna write it, I want it to be available to like everyone, because I want it to make people feel the way that Lord of the Rings makes like everyone feel, you know? And I also want it to be not in the Game of Thrones style where it's like, I don't know, like really like sad real world things. But there are, what do I want to say? There's no sexual assault. This is fun high fantasy. This
there you go.
Like bum me out high fantasy.
Which kind of segues us into kind of talking more about how you write horror, because I feel like that is something that we can always learn from, because I feel like that's hard. It's hard to make people scared, or at the very least, it's hard to do that well. And so I'm very curious, like, how you structure and write scary scenes.
I think that this is going to be a little underwhelming, because this for me was very much a learning experience. And so what I would say is that there were a lot of brackets with highlighted words that said, make this last longer, or why is this not scary? A lot of my internal thoughts going onto the page, a lot of scenes that ended up being pages long that were single paragraphs. I think this is probably most people's biggest advice, which is just like, get it done. Don't worry about how good it is, especially on a first draft. Who cares? That's what editing is for. And since reading your questions, I've been thinking about myself and my writing process. And what I've kind of realized is that I really only think in the planning phase and in the editing phase, and in that writing phase, I'm in a fugue state. Of course, that's how I would describe it. My husband described it as being intuitive. I think that's very nice. That has a real ring to it. I think that while I was writing, I was very much in film. It was something that my editor brought up too. She's like, you're structuring your entire story kind of like a screenplay, and then like breaking it down into actual prose, which is exactly what I did. Because at the time that I was like writing the first draft, I was only beginning to get back into reading, because like many people, I went through high school and college, and I was like, they're making me read all these books. Reading's not really fun for me anymore. And so I went from being a very avid reader to I have to read Great Expectations, and now books kind of suck. And then finally coming out of the other side of college, and being like, I think I'm going to get back into this. And I actually got into writing first. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do any of this. And I also lost my ability to know where commas go. And I didn't know that I lost that. So everyone should stay up to date on their English knowledge and their grammar, because it does fade. And so I started reading, and I like pushed myself to read horror. And that was quite a daunting thing because it takes quite a bit of time to read a book, depending on who you are. It also is very difficult to actually know what books you should read that will in fact inspire you. And so there's a lot of, that one didn't quite give me what I needed. Oh, this one has, maybe setting, or this one has a lot of suspense. And then I was just kind of trying to learn from everything that I was reading. And because of that, largely what I read for probably like 2 years was horror. And then I finally was like, I have to give myself a little bit of a break. I have to start reading other things, because I eventually got to a point where, if you eat a PB&J every day, eventually you're going to be like, peanut butter kind of sucks. And I got a little tired of it, and I needed to give myself a pause so that I could go back to enjoying it.
That, like, honestly, that's probably the best advice you could give anyone, is to read what you want to write, because I also did that. I also wrote and I published. That's crazy. Before I was really reading fantasy again. And so for my third book especially, I got introduced to Marissa Meyer, and she is a fantasy author. And I was just so inspired that she really shaped my third book, and honestly the most proud I am in terms of my writing. So yes, definitely read what you want to write, because like you're learning from people who hopefully are doing this well. I'm curious, can you give me some examples of like the books that you read, the ones that were like super influential, that sort of thing?
First of all, I think I'm going to bring up like my Goodreads or something. That way I can make sure that I'm like citing book and author.
Yes. Oh, please.
If I'm going to give people credit, I want to 100% be giving them credit. So, okay. So I have books that I read as research. And I actually, before I even got started, they're going to be probably backwards.
Ooh, we're putting something on the screen, but
I did not read all of these. That was what happened. The most influential in terms of like, I finished reading this on an airplane, and I said, I think I understand my book now.
Oh, wow.
Shout out to Brandon Weston. At the time, I believe they were teaching at a university. And what I really dug about this book was that they went and they spoke and interviewed so many different people in the Ozarks and talked to them about like, what are beliefs that your parents passed to you that maybe didn't come from church? What are the things that are growing in your garden, and what do you use them for? And it was very expansive, and I think like the things that were talked about, how it works within people's lives in this specific area, that I did not have access to.
Yeah.
Now for horror, so Winter's Bone was a big one. I also read Sharp Objects, because Gillian Flynn is also from the area. I think one of the first horror books that I read when I was getting into, I don't know, all of this was Dan Simmons' The Terror, which is kind of similar in his obsession with detail. Like there are entire parts of that book where he's describing like how to sail a ship. And it's like pages where it feels like he is talking about like which ropes to pull and things like that. And so that gave me a lot of inspiration for the importance of research, but also I knew that I could not do that. That did not work for me to be that specific or to write a book that's like 600 pages long. I can just about guarantee that that will never happen. I'm a major supporter of a 250 page book. Big believer. Stephen King's It, I felt gross the whole time. Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, I felt gross the whole time. Mayfly, I would almost say it's I consider it like horror comedy, but I definitely felt gross the whole time I was reading it. But I think those were most of the big ones that influenced me that I was reading at the time to kind of get into the mood of writing horror.
I mean, that's an extensive list. So like you were doing your research, you were doing your due diligence. You touched on how there's some books that there's like suspense and disgust throughout, and then there's others that give you moments of respite. And so like what do you think makes an effective horror scene or even an effective horror novel?
One of my inspirations in terms of, because I needed a break while I was writing, like I didn't want this to be a story that was only scary throughout the whole thing, that just painted this place in this horrifying, disgusting light. Like I needed it to show my conflict with my favorite place to go, which is that there are a lot of things that really disappoint me, you know, politically. I don't exactly align with a lot of the things that go down there. But I've met so many kind people. And I mean, you know, shout out to Chapel. I mean, you know, there are so many like really glowing examples of not just like kind people, because like I think a lot of times you can just find a kind person on most street corners, but finding people who want to like fight for an area to be better, to have better education, or to be kinder to queer people, or however, you know, whichever light we want to look at it in. There are lots and lots of people like that, and I wanted to show how I think that it is one of the most beautiful natural areas that our country has to offer, and I think that there's so much beautiful culture there. You know, I mean, like the bluegrass and the music and the long history of like floating the river, and like, you know, I was reading stories about people who would float different rivers, like the real rivers that are in, you know, the area that I kind of based it on, which is largely like the Jack's Fork and the Current River. And people who would float these rivers, and there would like be people in the past who lived along the river, and you would like stop and you knew that you could like go to their house and knock on the door, and she'd answer and she'd be like, all right, you want some stew? Like, I'm gonna cook for you, and you can camp out back. And I wanted to capture the beauty as well as, you know, a lot of it is, I didn't include any of my bad experiences from the area. It was mostly just transferred into, you know, fictional scenarios. But a big inspiration for kind of how I went about adjusting between, here's a beautiful place that I love very much, and here's kind of the flip of that coin, was actually, it was Stephen King's It, which I think does a really great job at flipping sometimes even just on a page and showing like the resiliency of a child in that situation. But I think a lot of times it's just the resiliency of people, and how you can have an entire family history of awful things happening in an area, but you love that place. Like, that's your home, and every bad memory you've had takes place there, but also every single good one. And it's possible to fear and love a place at the same time, and kind of trying to understand that within yourself. And then for writing horror, I focused on the things that I find scary. I think that's probably a very consistent way to know that you're writing it in a way that's translating I'm scared, because as you're writing it, you're picturing something that you in fact are scared of, and then it's like, well, what am I feeling? You know, I'm in this situation, I'm staring this thing with its gross floating feet in its glowing eyes. What do I feel? What am I doing? How is a person going to react to this? Are they going to freeze? Are they going to run? I think there's probably like a lot of horror examples. The one that comes to my mind is The Conjuring, of like the feet that don't touch the ground, and then like if these are the toes, like they like just drag. I hate that. A, toes, gross. B, knobby toes. They're always knobby toes. And then just not touching the ground. It's just, ugh. And so for me, so far, I base it on actual fears that I have, because I feel that I can pretty consistently keep to describing them very uncomfortably.
Yeah, have you ever like freaked yourself out so much you had to stop writing a scene?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, the scene where she's walking through like the canopy of trees and she's smoking and the sound starts changing. That one's probably the one that got to me the most, because I was picturing a place that I know that I go to several times a year, and that's where I was imagining this road. And I've walked that road at night and it doesn't feel good, you know? Like the whole time you're like, nah, there's things out here. I know it.
Yeah.
I'm not alone. This feels gross. I would like to go
Like
home.
I shouldn't be here.
Yep. The changes in the sound, that's something that usually freaks me out. You know, I've spent a lot of time in woods, and anytime that everything goes silent, you know, is there a tornado? Is there a predator? Like I go through the scary possibilities.
That's so fair. I was curious because anytime I've tried to write like a horror scene, and typically like when I say that, like I think I wrote it when I was like 13. Like it's been a while since I've tried to write something that was like genuinely scary. But like I would freak myself out because I would try writing it and I would imagine it too much, and it didn't help that like I would be next to the screen door.
Yeah.
So every time I would write something scary, I would like turn because I'm like something has to be behind me now.
Yeah.
And so I just had to know if you do that to yourself.
Totally. I did most of my writing for this one in a library in the middle of the day, so it was a little easier not to get spooked when
Ooh.
you're under fluorescent lighting. But all of the later editing took place in like the front room of the house we were living in at the time, which was like me at my desk, and then it was like window, glass door, window, just like looking out, and the neighborhood that we lived in like didn't have street lights, and it was like a vacation town, and so most people weren't there during the time of the year that I was editing, and so it was just like an empty street.
Yeah.
So it was pretty dark, pretty spooky out there. And I think anytime I'm confronted with a window at night, I look at it and I'm like, I don't know. There's probably someone on the other side that I just can't see that's watching me.
Yeah, no, especially like it's one of those things too where like you look, you're like, okay, nothing's there. But what if it is now?
Yeah.
What if it's there now?
Definitely. That's how it works
Gotta
in
look
scary
again.
movies. Look away and then it's there.
Yep. Yep. You touched on detail. There is a lot of detail in Stagnant Water, which I really, really liked. I don't really know how. I think I described it in my review as like you somehow reflect the like slow, observant nature of rural life, and also kind of put us into this kind of melancholy mood that I feel like Naomi also is in a state of. And so when it comes to like horror stories, like how much detail is too much detail, and like when do you describe in long full pages, like kind of how you mentioned with the sailors thing, or even like in scary scenes, and when do you make it like one sentence?
Wow, Kailey, that's a tremendous question. Okay.
Thank you.
I would say that the first thing is that everyone should just write however they want. Because ultimately, who cares? It's right. It's art. It's art. Oh my gosh, do literally whatever
Period.
you want. Do whatever you want, as long as you're not being like a total.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like what are we doing any of this for if it's not to challenge ourselves to learn, to challenge ourselves to do something different, to express ourselves, to express something that we see in the world that we think should be put to paper or put to screen, whatever it is. And so in terms of like how much is too much for you? You know, like, are you looking to Charles Dickens this, where you're like, I'm making a couple pennies for every page and I'm cranking those pages out, you know? Fair. You know, you want to write Dracula? Cool beans, dude. Whatever you feel does what you're trying to achieve. Now for me, I know that I'm a big fan of a single sentence. You know, I think sometimes I favor kind of an Ernest Hemingway approach to just bare bones say what it is. But then sometimes, obviously, I'm ranting about the colors of the leaves. Because like you said, you know, the appreciation for the world around you when you're living a rural life and you have time where you walk outside and you're just admiring the way that the leaves sound when they're hitting each other and how it changes in different weather and how your cosmos are a slightly different color today and how interesting that is. And you stop to take, you know, pictures to document. And, you know, one of your chickens is, you know, why is this one flapping around so much today? And there's a lot of stopping and thinking and admiring that I find myself doing a lot when I'm down in the Ozarks, because I very specifically am going to areas where I do not have cell service. And I feel also that I should say when I say these areas, I'm not talking about Lake of the Ozarks. I am not a Lake of the Ozarks girly. I am a river person. I like my national scenic riverways and my crystal clear water. And so I really wanted, especially since throughout the story, she's preparing to leave. And anytime I've moved, and I've done it several times, I get really caught up for a few months in every time it rains. And you go, oh, I wonder how many times it'll rain before I leave, and how many times will I get to smell the way that the soil is when, you know, the water hits it. Ooh, is petrichor different here versus a couple states away? Like, it's easy to, you know, start getting pretty whimsical or melancholy, depending on which side of the spectrum you're on, about a place that you love and are leaving for whatever reason. And so I really wanted to make sure that that was in there. Thank you for complimenting it. It's definitely one of the recurring things that gets complaints in comments. I've never read a comment on my book.
Really?
I just see them in my mind. That's a joke. I've read every single one.
I was like, come on, it's okay.
I can tell you when I got my worst review, because I was on my honeymoon. And I read it while I had asked, I was like, oh, Danny, I'm feeling a little tired. My back hurts. Like, why don't you go around Angkor Wat? And I stayed there and I read my only 2-star review. And I was like, you son of a... Like, I'm on vacation and you thought it was okay to talk about me like this? He's fine.
Oh my goodness.
He's fine. It's cool. Whatever. He actually had some good points. So I try to learn a little bit while also acknowledging, you know, like we said earlier, we are who we are. We are artists.
Yeah.
It's good to listen to what people say, but it's also important to know who you should be listening to and which parts of what they're saying you should hear and which parts you can go, I don't think that one applies to me.
So real. Oh my gosh. We could go on a whole tangent about how true that statement is.
It's a hard one. That's a hard one to deal with.
I always like to round out the interview by asking fun random questions. So
go for it. Oh, I'm so excited. Fun random questions are my favorite thing in the world.
Okay. Well, hopefully you like them. What was the last book you gave 5 stars?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Nope. I have an answer for this. Okay. So the last 5-star book that I read was One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El Akkad. And
ooh,
very short, easy one to get through, which, as I said before, I'm a massive fan of 250 pages or under. It is very emotional. It's kind of memoir-ish. But it's also it's him as well as looking at like what's been happening in Palestine, particularly since October 7th, but he also gives history into before that. But he is a wordsmith. I mean, the ability to wrangle emotion with words that he has is it doesn't come across this earth very often. And he was a journalist for many years beforehand, which helps you in writing, but like the way that it's written, it doesn't feel like journalism. Like it feels like writing in a diary and hoping that like your grandkids are going to read it and that they're going to be able to look at it and be like, wow, like things are so different now and we've fixed this problem and now this pain isn't in the world. And it feels that's how I felt, is that I'm reading it and I'm heartbroken, and yet I have all of this hope that we can stop hurting the world like this. We can stop hurting Palestinians like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the last 5-star book you read? We're going to ask me questions. I'm going to ask you questions.
The most diverse read I read this year and just in general was The Comfort of Crows, and I'm forgetting the author's name at this moment. I'm sure I can find it on Goodreads as well.
Yeah, it's
I should also have said the author. Yeah, right? Goodreads is so useful. The Comfort of Crows by Margaret Renkl. And it's literally her going week by week, creating like poems and short stories about the nature around her. And it definitely it struck a chord with me just because like I care about our environment, but I don't know a lot about it, nor do I know a lot about like conservation. And this is someone who knows a lot about that and essentially shares like the same passions as I do. It just felt like I was actually learning from someone who can tell me more about like different ways to make a garden and fight back in very small, almost unseen ways, if that makes sense. Okay, second question. We have 3. What is your favorite drink to have next to you while you write?
Oh, boy. Okay, this is like a tarot reading. It's like what do I have? What do I want to have? What will I have? So I start every morning with coffee with a lot of oat milk creamer.
Iced or hot?
It's usually iced, but it's dependent on the temperature. If it is 70 degrees or over while I'm drinking this, that thing is not hot. That's criminal. I will be sweating all day long. I'll be sweating 6 hours later for no reason. And so shout out to Bottle of Water, because she stays cold no matter what. And then when I'm choosing just to have a good time, it's an ice cold Coke.
The last question I have, and I think this is going to be very interesting because I'm kind of disappointed that the playlist was at the end of the book because I just went, oh, she added a playlist. But what is a song you've connected with Stagnant Water?
Wow. Okay, I'm so happy that you mentioned this because I have an answer. So I put it at the back because I let myself get slightly embarrassed by it, which I'm gonna go ahead and say I should get over. I think that comes from like fan fiction years where like you're reading like song fics and you're like, okay, the writing's great. Why do you keep putting lyrics in here? And so I think my brain couldn't separate it from like being on AO3. And so I felt like it didn't
right.
writing like a novel or a like a horror novel, but the song that I would listen to on repeat on my way to the library every day that I wrote, which shout out to the public library, was, and this one might be surprising because it's probably the song on the playlist that you're like, where did that one come from? But Cocoon by Jack Johnson. I love Jack Johnson. My parents were obsessed with him when I was a kid. And I just think that song is so beautiful and so very much about like loving while you're healing. And like there's that the turn of phrase, how do you expect anyone to love you if you don't love yourself? But like loving yourself is like a lifelong journey, and if you're waiting for this magical moment where you're in 100% acceptance of yourself to form relationships, you're probably going to be like a deeply lonely person. Like that is a high expectation to put of yourself, rather than being like, I'm working on things and I'm trying to be the best version of myself, and I want to find other people who also are trying to be the best version of themselves, who are acknowledging their faults. And that's very much what I feel in the song. Let me cocoon you while you turn into who you are, and we'll take turns with this, caring for each other and being there for each other while we change, because ultimately that's what life is. You marry one person, you fall in love with one person, and they very well will stay very similar, but we're not the same person throughout our lives. We change daily in some situations. And it's about loving every version of the caterpillar to cocoon to butterfly.
Yeah, I love that. That is so sweet. Is there anything else that you haven't said that you would like to say now?
Boy, that's a hard one. Yeah, that wasn't on your question list, so I have no premeditated thought structure on that. I don't know, just that, I guess just reiterating what we talked about throughout this, where I think that people get very rigid about their ideas of what their writing should be like, what their writing process should be like. Do whatever you want. You want to Mad Libs a story together? Like, is that how you can do something? Is you pick little topics out of a hat? Like you're doing a 48-hour film festival, then do it. Literally anything that helps. Like anything that helps you write that's not like, try not to do drugs, like, things like that.
Yeah, within reason.
And also, don't reread while you're writing. Don't do it. Just keep writing. Just ignore whatever's happened. And if you completely have changed something, then maybe there's a reason for that. And you'll go back and you'll be like, what? That used to be that way? Which one works better? Ultimately, the whole thing is like life. The whole thing's just an exercise. We're just working stuff out. No book has to be perfect. No book is perfect. No book should be perfect. Just get it done. Don't purposefully write something to hurt someone. And as long as you're not doing that, the world is your oyster.
Well said. That was amazing. Plug your book. Tell us where we can find Stagnant Water.
Hit up Barnes & Noble, because we gotta love Barnes & Noble. There's an oddities shop in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There's also a bookstore in Raytown, Missouri called Trailhead Books where you can get it, because, if you're gonna buy it, please go to a bookstore. Actually, we're gonna see if maybe that oddity store in Santa Fe, may have closed down. And that'd be something. No, it's still open. Okay, the Crow's Nest in Santa Fe, 518 Old Santa Fe Trail in New Mexico. Go give Rose some money so that she can give me some money.
Go right now.